We're live apparently. Looks like it said in the Llewellyn chat right there. So hello everybody.
Okay.
Hola, I'm Mustafa Gatollari.
Michelle Bellerie.
Brandon Alvis, Ghost Hunters. Very excited to be here. So I guess they're saying to start with our background. So, I got involved in the paranormal at a pretty young age. In 1995, I lost my oldest brother to cancer. And in 2004, I lost another brother to suicide. So that kind of sent me on my journey into the unexplained, if you will. I was very lucky in 2006 to start the American Paranormal Research Association to solely investigate historical locations throughout the United States. I've been yet again lucky to work with brilliant medical doctors, scientists, and engineers in helping me remain as grounded as possible in scientific principle. And I met Mustafa here on Ghost Hunters, and I've been a big fan of Michelle for a long time. Loved your work on A&E, Paranormal State, fantastic stuff. And excited to be here and talk with everyone about ghosts and hauntings for sure.
Yeah, it's kind of surreal for me to be here too. Going on 17 years now investigating the paranormal and diving into research. I got into it because I was 100% skeptic. I was really kind of sick and tired of my family blaming all of their problems on this jinn that they thought was in the house. So I started really delving into jinn and a lot of the phenomena that they were talking about. Everything that came up in my studies, it didn't really seem like it was a jinn. It seemed like it was more paranormal. And I was like, okay, well, ghosts. And when I was a kid, growing up as a Muslim kid, I always thought like jinn and ghosts were like the same thing. They're not, they're completely different. And the more I started researching and really trying to dispel any notion that there was anything going on that was supernatural, paranormal in the house that we grew up in, the more kind of questions I had than answers, because a lot of things just didn't fit, or, little tidbits of information here or there just kind of popped out at me. And I started investigating the paranormal and came across some stuff that I just couldn't explain. And like Brandon says, my fellow ghost hunter's brother, if it ain't normal, it's paranormal. So, we've been at it and we were lucky enough to meet. And we got this book coming out and I'm really, really excited.
I'm Michelle Bellerie. I think I'm the old man in the group. I've been doing this since the late 80s and early 90s. I've got a degree in comparative religious studies and learned demonology from the Jesuits. Most people get to see me on the paranormal shows as a psychic, but my initial involvement with Paranormal State was as a researcher. So I did a lot of behind the scenes stuff. Think of me as like Bobby from Supernatural, but without the whiskey.
That's awesome. That's super cool. All right.
So we're entering the Halloween season. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we're entering the Halloween. I can't. What's the Hain season? What salmon season?
Samhain.
I don't even know what that is. I'm so bad. Do you feel this time of the year is more spiritually active? Why or why not? Brandon and I were actually talking about this recently. I think that environmental conditions have a lot to do with it. I don't necessarily think it pertains to like a calendar date, like, because that's just an arbitrary kind of like date that was picked. But I think with seasons brings different environmental conditions. So maybe at one point or at one point in the world at a certain particular point in time that there was like different environmental conditions that kind of bred these great elements for what we think are hauntings or whatever. But I don't necessarily think like, oh, just because it's Halloween, it's October 31st, that this is a more spiritually active time. I think the environmental conditions has everything to do with it.
Everybody always asks why you ghost hunt in the dark. And I think there's some connection between our associations with spiritual activity after hours during the dark and spiritual activity that's heightened during the dark side of the year. We have a lot of Celtic traditions connected to Halloween, Samhain, and the thinning of the veil, where it was the belief that that was when spirits of the dead, ancestors, and other sorts of spirits would be able to cross over more palpably into the human world. But I think there's a much more practical reason. We ghost hunt in the dark less because the spirits are more active. It's not like you don't have hauntings during the day. It's quieter. When there is less extraneous noise, more people are asleep, our thoughts turn inward, we pay more attention. During the dark side of the year, there's a similar effect. The nights are longer, there's less outside activity as the season gets colder. So we have more opportunity to notice things that we might otherwise be distracted by when we're out in the middle having fun on vacations during summer. It's stuff like that.
Absolutely, I can agree more. It's cutting down on that contamination is key and really helps us not only be more in tune within the investigation, but collecting, empirical evidence and data that really helps us understand the type of phenomena we're dealing with. So just like Michelle said, less traffic, less people. It's a lot quieter. So it's not about, being in the dark per se. It's more about cutting down on that contamination. That's, very useful and key in investigations.
What basic precautions or advice would you give to people looking to begin ghost hunting or investigating the paranormal?
I think the biggest thing for me would be to 100% know your own intentions before going into an investigation. I'm not a yoga meditation guy or anything like that. If that's what works for you, that's great. But I think just really knowing who you are and what you're trying to go for in an investigation, just like when you're about to meet somebody for the first time, just like you're about to go on a job interview or whatever it is, there's something that you're going for and there's a goal that you're trying to achieve. What is the best, most honest, and most honest way to do it without taking any kind of shortcuts, whether that be emotional, trying to really communicate with an entity, addressing the elephant in the room. If you're going to a place where there was history of like slavery, let's say, you can't really pretend to understand what any of those entities who are on the property went through. And I think addressing that, vocalizing that, makes you come from a real honest place and shows that you're trying to move the needle, but you're not trying to get anything for free, so to say. You're not trying to just say like, oh yeah, I can understand where you're coming from, because that's not a really, for me, never works. So I think addressing the elephant in the room, clearing your intentions, and just really getting your head right before you go in. That's like the best way best thing I can tell anybody to, the precautions to take before going into an investigation.
For me, there's two aspects to it. From a practical aspect, what do you want out of the experience? And having a good sense of that going in, that also dovetails with my academic ground. I've got a huge echo, so if I seem to stutter, it's very weird. Actually, I'm going to fix that. So from my academic background, do some research, not just on the location, but on what other people have done in this field before. One, so that you're not reinventing the wheel, but also so you know what to expect. From a psychic standpoint, and this is also a good psychological standpoint, have strong boundaries. Develop a good sense of where you end and begin and where the rest of the world is, so that when you go to a place, you are not getting false positives of experience. You go in and it's dark and it's creepy and there's cobwebs and maybe you have an anxiety reaction because there's spiders, and you mistake that for something having an effect on you because you haven't spent enough time to really understand how your internal feelings work. So getting a solid handle on how you experience anxious and frightening situations, what it feels like for you without any paranormal influence, how you are like when you've been sitting in the dark for several hours, getting a really good sense of your internal mental and psychological landscape so that you can tell the difference between that and an actual experience is really important, especially if you are going into the field with any hope of acting like a psychic.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100% as well. Research is very important, not only from the historical standpoint and really understanding these locations that you're going to and trying to investigate and connect with in a sense, but it's really important to understand the people that you're trying to contact, the entities. Understanding their cultural beliefs, their belief systems, how they live their everyday lives. Many of these people lived, worked, and died in these locations that we're investigating, and trying to connect to that as much as possible is key to have that, human interaction. And, first and foremost, respect is always key. Going in and treating someone the way you would treat anyone in your everyday life, like Mustafa mentioned earlier. But I really think understanding the cultural beliefs of the people that you're trying to communicate with and the entities is a huge factor in really trying to sympathize with who they were as people and understanding where they came from, what their belief system was. I think that really takes it a step further when going in and trying to communicate with said spirits.
There was a quick question in there about language barriers that I wanted to jump in on, because I've heard that, and on Paranormal State at one point, they had Sergei speaking Russian to a spirit that they suspected might have been someone who was Russian. And in my experience, while it helps to meet entities and beings sort of halfway, like it's a sign of respect to do the research and try to communicate with them in something that's familiar to them, whether it's symbols, language, a belief system. It's your intent more than anything else that translates. And that is a universal translator. So trying to speak to a spirit in its own original language is helpful, but not necessary. I see it more as a sign of respect.
It's that energy that you bring in. Like there's so many times where I remember growing up, I'd be listening to these like Albanian radio shows, and I didn't speak the language. My parents listened to it, but I knew exactly what they were going for. And this is like a radio show, or even if you'd watch, you think about it when you watch programs in a different language, you listen to songs in another language, when somebody's being honest and they're trying to bring that energy in there. So yeah, Michelle, 100%. I agree. I've tried to communicate with entities in the limited Spanish and stuff that I know. But I think any of the success that we had, it was always from just expressing that intention, always. Go up. Let me see. More questions. What's going on?
Yes.
Do you believe that there are some people who attract entities more than others? I've had experiences since I was quite little at every house. Yeah. I'll just say briefly, I don't really have that much experience with it, but I would say that just like people in life, I don't think it's necessarily like one person's a conduit for attracting all entities. I just think that the people that you are attracted to and who you attract in life are the same types of people that you're going to attract to in those energies in death as well. So whoever your people are, whoever you vibe with now, or who you're going to vibe with in the afterlife, if that's how we're conceiving this.
In old school paranormal investigation, early 20th century, there was a concept called a cooler, where it's the exact opposite is true, where there are certain people, no matter what's going on around them, if you add them to a place where phenomena regularly happens, it cools down the activity. Something about them, whether it's their energy, their attitude, seems to just make things stop. And converse to that is the idea of a nexus. This is a key part of poltergeist phenomena, and it's one of the theories of what causes poltergeist phenomena. Not so much that it's the spirits knocking things around, but there are people who are focal points of activity, that they themselves have something possibly psychokinetic, maybe latent psychic abilities, some quality of they themselves heighten activity. I worked with an investigator who's connected with Madison Seminary. And if you ever wanted to ramp up activity, you would dump her in there because something about her just seemed to stir things up, seemed to feed the activity of the spirits, not in a negative way, just adding a little bit of juice to the mix.
We had a very similar experience with that in a case on A&E's Ghost Hunters, where this woman, was so terrified of her property, of her house, that she ended up fleeing the property and selling it. And when we came in to investigate that property, the house was empty, all the furniture was gone. It was in the process of being sold, and we could not find any form of activity whatsoever. So we decided to actually bring her back in to the house. And as soon as she walked in, we started having crazy environmental changes, everything from high EMF, pressure changes, temperature changes, and she was that conduit. Once we took her out of the house, it all ceased. It completely stopped. So, we had a really good example of that.
sometimes people are haunted more than the house.
Absolutely. And
I agree.
that was a really cool, very, very cool experience to have, and I've read about it many times, never really to that point exactly experienced it. And to, go in, monitor, record the conditions of the house without her there, and then having her come in and having that massive jump and spike in activity was really, really interesting to see.
Bunny Grangard asks one that I always get asked, and I want to hear other people's answers. Do many investigators go in with the thought of crossing over spirits? I will say that I am team not crossing over for a whole lot of reasons. The main one being, how presumptuous of me would it be that, like, somehow I have, one, the ability, and two, the right to just open some sort of door into the great beyond and be like, oh, you're not supposed to be here, boot. Like, if we believe that these things, that spirits, any of them, are actually like human beings, or that they were at some point, that they are sentient, actual things, they have their own process. They have their own rights to be there. If they're a human being who's haunting because of traumatic circumstances, that trauma is stuff that they're still working through. Who the heck am I to be like, nah, you shouldn't be here, F off. So
No, I
that's my
couldn't
thought
agree
on
more.
that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that was spot on with that, and that's exactly how I believe. I can't even add to that. It's perfect. That's a question that's been asked many times to me, and people really seem to get worked up about that a lot too. Where you can go onto YouTube in the comments section or look at social media in general and watch the reaction to some of the shows or some investigations, and people just get really upset that, oh, you're not trying to help them or cross them over. I agree 100% with Michelle. It's, who would we be to go in there and do that? We just don't have that right. It's not. It's just. It seems unethical completely. And to go into a situation like that and think of yourself so highly that you're some kind of savior to these entities, or whatever it may be, I think it's egotistical in a way, for sure.
I think it also is very presumptuous and just kind of like, it's kind of arrogant to think that, like, this is, first of all, where did the idea of crossing over come from? What's this idea of like how we're crossing a spirit over? Where does that exist? Where are they crossing over to? Do we even know what the afterlife looks like? I don't really think we don't. I don't. I sure as hell have no idea. And I don't think anybody can confidently say that this is what it is and these are the rules of it. I just think like a lot of those beliefs, especially the idea of crossing over, is like, it's presupposed. It's all in this presumptuous kind of idea where this thing came from somewhere and this is what the fact is. But you can't treat theory as fact. We need to document the phenomenon. We need to get whatever evidence that we can. And it's still, the paranormal is still very nascent in the field where it is right now. So I think, just to, even when I used to study like jinn, or like someone being possessed, or this activity is attributed to a jinn or whatever it is, I'm like, how arrogant of me to sit and think like, oh, the religion that I grew up in and the beliefs that I grew up in, this is what the activity is that's affecting like this person. I'm like, it's from however old that religion is, like, who knows what entities are there. I just think, again, it's so arrogant to do that.
Well, and because there's another follow-up question of what is crossing over. It's the generally accepted idea in the paranormal that certain people have the ability to literally push a spirit into its next life, whether you're moving it into heaven or somewhere, but you're opening a gate between realities and sending it somewhere else. To be clear, it's different from clearing a spirit from a location, binding a spirit, or other methods of removal from the space that's being haunted. So crossing over is removing it from our reality entirely, and presumably sending it on to the great beyond, past this intermediary state. There was another question from Llewellyn. Christopher had a great question. What is the best and most recommended technology you can use in ghost hunting in this technological age?
One device I always talk about, and it's been, great for us and has really provided a lot of data and empirical evidence, is an EDI plus. And, we always refer to it as like the Swiss Army knife of a paranormal tool. Not only does this device record temperature, pressure, humidity, vibration, EMF, but all of those environmental conditions can be recorded on a time code to an SD card. So you can cross-reference and correlate those environmental conditions with other devices on your investigation and see that in a graph form and really show you what your baseline readings are in that location. And when you have anomalous type of changes happen, you can see that not only visually, but have that documented. So I'd say the EDI Plus, the data logger, is a device that's very useful. You can get a lot of information out of it. And it's something that's really helped push our research forward, especially when it comes to going and trying to consult various technical industries and experts from those technical industries. And we can provide that data, provide that information, and we can really walk away knowing, is this something that's a natural occurrence or something that we can't quite explain?
I'm not much of a tech person, but especially because I think that most of the tech is based off of the same sort of pseudoscience that drives dowsing or Ouija boards. Like all of it is up in the air as to how it works. You're asking like a spirit to interface with EMF for K2 meters and things like that. And all of it is still really in the weeds when it comes to how that actually works.
Yeah, and highly
but
manipulated.
To back up Brandon, anything that logs things and archives and gives you timestamps so you can compare what's going on. And so you can go back through your evidence and know that, this person was doing this at this time. This were your environmental effects. Like archiving and logging as much information as possible is your best approach. So whatever technology gives you that option and whatever programs and apps give you that option is your best bet.
Yeah, for me, I love a good EVP. I love great audio. I love Ambisonic. We call it Ambisonic Microphone. It's a Zoom. Basically, it's a omnidirectional mic. It's got 4 basic microphones that give you a 360-degree audio view. It's like basically a master shot for sound. So when you go to investigate, a lot of times certain noises, or you'll see something, you go to another room. A lot of times when Brandon and I in our investigations, where we kind of feel like we're being drawn to another room, and then it was a dead end, pun intended. But we'd go there, and when we'd go back and review our audio after we left the room, then we would hear an EVP or we'd hear voices in there. And the Ambisonic microphone let us know, oh, we were hearing activity there, and we can get an idea by listening to it which direction it came from. So I really love that tool because you kind of just, not to sound like, an infomercial, but you set it and you forget it. And then when you go back and you review the audio, it's like, oh my God, you're hit with all of these really, really great things. So yeah, I love that tool. And it's a little on the pricey side. I think it's about $200. Really don't go down in price, but Zoom makes a lot of great audio equipment. And it's got different modes. It's got binaural mode if you wanted to mess with binaural, that you can get the ear things, but you can do that on the Zoom Ambisonic as well.
Shelly Johnson asked a question, and a bunch of people are like, oh, I hope they answer that. So I'm going to read it off so we don't miss it. From Shelly: before an investigation, are there rituals with all of you for protection before entering a location? And also, what about any of you, if you've gone into a location where you knew it was really bad, and did you just leave? So since I read it, I'll just kind of toss it at you guys.
Yeah, everyone has their own personal belief system when it comes to protection and, preparing themselves to go into a location and possibly connect with entities. So for me, I have my own personal belief system. I have things that I believe, empower me and shield me from certain situations that I have that's very personal to myself. But again, that's, like I said, it's very personal. It's different for each and every person. I have a little bag that I carry with me that I have certain things that have been gifted to me over the years for protection purposes. And I keep that bag with me at all times. And I know it's always there, and it definitely helps.
And again, like I agree with Brandon, I think it's 100% personal. But for me, I journalize in my own head, what kind of person do I want to be? And how can I have, this is going to seem really childish, but how can I have fun while doing the work and really enjoy myself? Because I think if you can really put your enthusiasm or generate enthusiasm for really loving what you're doing at that moment, even now, as I'm sitting here talking with 2 great people who I respect and admire so much, how can I get a great feeling out of this moment right now? If I go for that, and go for broke. I could do silly things in the investigation. The investigation can be a total dud. We don't get anything. I don't care because I'm fighting for every yard, so to speak. So as long as I resolve myself to do that, I don't really care what happens in the investigation. I've had stuff happen to me. I've gotten scratched. I've come encountered with some weird things. I've felt pains in my side. That never really lingered or bothered me afterwards. And it's from just really resolving to have that conviction to have as much fun while doing the work as possible, because I think that's the greatest. That's how you really show gratitude for the fact that, okay, I have a life. I'm going to do whatever I can in this moment, and I'm going to show as much appreciation for it as I can. I don't know. It's not religious or anything like that, but it's my religion. So that's how I do it.
See, I don't think it has to be religious. For me, the answer depends on which of my many hats I'm wearing if I get called in, because I work as a psychic investigator. I'm also pagan clergy, and I work as a research-based investigator. And those are all very different approaches. So if I'm coming in as clergy, I'm coming in probably because people need me to clear the house, set up boundaries, and do some sort of ritual of cleansing for the family to make them feel better. And that's a very different set of preparations. As a psychic, my job is to be as open as possible. So there's a counterintuitive aspect to how I prepare, which is actually taking down a lot of my boundaries and making myself more vulnerable than I normally would be out in the regular world. The blindfold has become a usual, like a helpful touchstone for that, where I put that on, and that sort of triggers I am in like my total interior space, and now I'm as open as possible. If I'm going in as a researcher, I don't want the distraction of psychic impressions. I want to be able to focus on the facts, on the history of the location. And so I'm going to go in with a lot more shielding and a lot more of the intent of just focusing here and not with like the psychic vision. So that's my thing. Okay, from Llewellyn. Michelle, you recently released an updated and expanded edition of your classic Dictionary of Demons, and Mustafa, you grew up with beliefs of the jinn. Do you feel that most paranormal activity is demonic or negative in nature? Why or why not? I'll start since it was addressed to me. I think that we use the word demon way too much in the paranormal. I think there's a temptation to do so, partly because we're in a very predominantly Christian society right now. There's an overpowering temptation to interpret everything through a Christian lens, but also because paranormal media, movies and books and everything like that is one of the easiest spook factors to kind of toss out. One of the reasons that I wrote the Dictionary of Demons, as somebody who's got a degree in comparative religious studies, took demonology from Jesuits. What we call demons and what our history of demons and demonology is actually very, very complicated. And they're not even always evil things. The concept of demons has evolved over time at the root, and it is at the core of Western civilization's magical beliefs. Demons are evil spirits that are bent on doing things to humanity, but sometimes they're even ancient gods, just like the redheaded stepchild of like the creator god who was just up to no good. And the interesting intersection between a certain type of demon in the Western tradition, the demons of King Solomon, the 72 demons of the Goetia, intersect in history with some Islam ideas of jinn, where Solomon is someone who was, in Christian and Jewish traditions, given the ability to command, bind, and exorcise demons. But in Islamic folklore, it's jinn that he works with. And there's a couple of points where that intersected. And I'd love to hear some of Mustafa's background with that, because I know in Islamic folklore, a lot of what we hear in, a Christian background would say, oh, it's gremlins, it's fairies, it's ghosts. It's probably jinn from like the folk perspective of like the things that steal the things around your house, or when your cat's acting weird, or, you tie a tail on the jinn to get it to quit messing with your house.
Yeah, I mean, jinn are just basically other entities. They're just like there's human beings. God, Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, say like Allah created man and jinn exist in this other dimension, this other plane, and there's Muslim jinn, there's agnostic jinn, there's jinn who it's basically us, but it's like a Pixar movie. It's a jinn world, so they exist there. Some of them cross into our realm and they mess with us, or they'll take our things, like you said, they'll steal things, or I came from a real peasant kind of family background, from Albanian peasants, where like anything that went wrong, there's a jinn that was behind it. There's stories about people's horses being taken, and they see their horses in the morning and horses hair's all braided and everything, and it's like, well, then that means a jinn stole your horses and then used it for one of its
elf
weddings.
locks. Holy crap! That's exact same thing is in Celtic Irish tradition. That's what the fairies do.
Yeah.
Who also inhabit another realm. They sometimes interact. They sometimes even have wed people, like baking elf locks or plating elf locks into the. That's awesome. That's so cool.
Anyway. Yeah, it's happened. I've heard stories of that and stuff. It's like even things like where you probably heard it in other cultures too. Is like, don't go outside at night and whistle. Don't go making like clicking or like noises of like like if you're chopping with scissors, right? Or you're doing like farm work, don't make like clanging noises near a tree, because that's where jinns live, and they'll come and if you're a young girl, they're going to take you and you're going to be like a bride of a jinn or something like that. When I was a kid, I always wanted to marry a jinn because they have the strength of like 10 men. Like, oh, that's cool. It's like, my wife's bodyguard, that'd be dope. But I grew up like understanding that, okay, these are just these other types of they're just alternate humans, and they exist in this different plane. So I was never really necessarily afraid of them, because the second when I read the Quran and I read the Islamic traditions and I read everything about jinn, I'm like, okay, well, it's just like dealing with people. So then that immediately took away all the fear. But yeah, I think you answered it perfectly, Michelle. But I don't think that we understand enough or have enough evidence or documentation to like suggest that like a lot of entities or a lot of things that are happening or a lot of this paranormal activity can be attributed to jinns, fairies, or any of these type of like mythical beings that we associate them with. I just think we need to gather more data.
I want to stop and recommend Ali A. Olomi, who is a professor at PSU, and he is my go-to jinn guy. Like, just his Wednesday jinn threads on Twitter are to die for if you love folklore anyway. Yeah. But because it's come up, and I've started to see people like the paranormal has this thing where we have buzzwords, or once somebody like learns, oh, there are elementals, suddenly like everybody's show is like investigating an elemental, and you don't always get the context. Jinn definitely became one of those as we get curious about this. And there's, I think, sometimes an exoticism that we make the mistake of making because it's coming from a different culture that we're not entirely familiar with.
Yeah.
And that lack of familiarity makes it very easy to just go, oh, everything's jinn. So finding good sources and learning about it. So Ali Olomi, highly recommended for like disambiguating like jinn, demons, all of it. It's great. I'll keep reading questions if you guys don't. Wait, all right, from yep. Llewellyn. Janine had a great question. Have any three of you had a spirit follow you home after investigation or attach itself to you after an investigation? Take it away, guys.
I've only had one instance of that, and I was lucky enough to actually be able to document it. Not an attachment per se, but I was investigating a location in Santa Clarita, California, called the Heritage Junction Park. And it's a historical park which has 9 or 10 different buildings that were moved from different areas to its current location at the park. And on multiple investigations, we recorded the voice of this man that was almost moaning in pain, which did correlate with the historical fact of the location. Henry Mayo Newhall, who built the house as a summer home, unfortunately passed away because he was bucked off of a horse and broke his ribs and died days later. And on multiple occasions, we documented that voice that we believed to be Henry Mayo Newhall. And so after an investigation one night, I think it was 13, 14 hours worth of being at this location, I drive home about 95 miles away, walk into my apartment at the time, set my equipment down, and I proceed to see the closet door in my living room open up by itself. So instantly, being that I had my equipment there, I hit record on my audio recorder, set it down, walked at my staircase, and about 5 minutes later, walked down, stopped it, and played back. Didn't ask any questions, didn't attempt to have any interaction per se. But when I played that back, the exact same voice that I've collected multiple times at Heritage Junction at the Newhall Ranch House was collected in my apartment 95 miles away, and actually matched up through spectrum analysis, where we took both audio recordings and broke it down frequency by frequency, decibel range, and it matched almost perfectly. So that was the only instance I ever had of something following me home. And again, I was lucky enough to actually document it and cross-reference it with the previous data.
I take a very different approach with a lot of my investigation. I don't usually like bring onto the shows how much magic and occultism informs my own practices. So I don't usually have things follow me home because I work with a lot of spirits directly. I have what one would call spirit allies. I'm not a big fan of spirit guides because most of them are like past family members, things like that. And they're very helpful for helping to hold boundaries and make sure that nothing that I don't expect, since they're already on that side, they catch all the bad stuff before it makes it to me. So just as a side note, if you're ever not sure about how to protect yourself in locations and you are someone who does ancestor work or works directly with spirits, ask some of the spirits around you to help out. That's sort of their native territory, and they're much better suited to catch things if that's part of your belief system. And if that's not part of your belief system, I just talked about some very weird stuff, and that's fine.
No, I've never had anything follow me. I don't even like hanging out with myself. I don't think any entities want to come and hang out with me, so I'm good.
Looks like unfortunately time is about to wrap up.
Okay, what is one thing that the three of you want folks to know about working with ghosts and the paranormal? I would just repeat what I said at the beginning. Know why you're doing it and make sure it's going to be something that is going to make you happy. I love to study. I tell people, like, I study the dead or the afterlife really to make my own life better. That's why I got into the paranormal. It was to help family members and members of my community really reconcile themselves with the hauntings that they were experiencing in their own lives. Like Michelle said, people are haunted. What can you learn from those hauntings and how can you use it to just make your life better? You know, we don't know what waits for us after we're gone, but that doesn't mean, if there is something, that doesn't mean that we take for granted what we have now. Not to sound all after school special, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Don't assume things are evil, malevolent, nefarious simply because they're unfamiliar to you. Expand your horizons, study as much as you can about world religious beliefs, spiritual practices, folklore, family hoodoo, anything. Just because it's occult or magical doesn't mean that it was trying to summon demons either. So be as informed and as open-minded as possible. And simply because something gives you a feeling that is unsettled doesn't mean that it's attacking you. Go in with the assumption that the world is a wilder and stranger place than we can ever imagine. And most of it's just different. It's not trying to hurt you.
Yeah, I agree. And, do as much book research as possible, prior to getting involved in the field. Understand what your belief system is, what your intentions are. Respect is always key. Obviously, your belief system can evolve and change throughout time, but really, getting a hold of what your intentions are and how you want to go about conducting your research, how you want to go about trying to communicate with entities is huge. And I would recommend as much book research as possible from all different belief systems to really have an understanding of what your goal is and how you want to go about it.
Ta-da!
Thank you guys. Thanks for watching. Michelle,
thanks for putting up with the tech issues. The feedback here is real special, but we managed.
So happy. It was great. Thank you guys.